What is the craziest thing a man has ever gone through in a long-distance relationship? That was the question my friend Anna posed to me over the phone last week, her voice dripping with skepticism. I was in my apartment, pacing near the window, trying to mentally prepare for the 7-hour time difference I would need to manage that night. I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I picked up a care package I'd just finished packing for Sarah, a new journal, some artisanal coffee from a local roaster, and a handwritten letter sealed with a wax stamp. That package felt like a tangible rebuttal to all of Anna's doubts. My name is Jason, and for the past 3 years, my entire world revolved around Sarah. She was a high-level international aid worker, constantly deployed to remote, high-risk zones. She was brilliant, driven, and committed to something bigger than herself, traits I deeply admired. I was a 32-year-old lead software engineer living in a major tech city, with a life that was comfortable, organized, and perhaps a little too predictable. The distance was immense, stretching across continents and countless time zones, but our relationship felt equally immense. I often defended the relationship to anyone who questioned it, Anna most of all. I told them that the distance was actually what made us strong. It forced us to rely on communication, discipline, and emotional commitment, not just proximity and convenience. I thought I was pragmatic. I thought I was smart. I designed systems for a living. I knew how to make things work, even under difficult parameters. The LDR felt like a complex but solvable equation. Our routine was a strict schedule of video calls, usually late at night for me, early morning for her, and twice yearly visits when she had what she called a rotation leave. Those visits were intense, packed with sightseeing, fancy dinners, and hours of uninterrupted conversation. The contrast between my structured life and her high-stakes existence made our time together feel urgent and precious. When we were together, everything was effortless, clicking into place as if the 3,000 miles between us dissolved instantly. "It's just the timing, Jason," Anna insisted that afternoon, making me sigh inwardly. "She only sees you when it suits her international travel schedule. You've built your entire life around waiting for her 5-day leaves. It's not a relationship, it's an appointment." I dismissed the comment with the usual lines. "She's saving the world, Anna. Her work is important. I'm happy to support her." The truth was, I felt safe in this arrangement. I'd seen too many of my friends' relationships fall apart due to petty, messy, proximity-based conflicts. With Sarah, I had a perfect, idealized partner, one who was always just out of reach, but whose commitment was absolute, proven by her ability to carve out time for me despite her world-saving mission. The distance was my emotional shield. It ensured things never got too messy, too real, too close. Sarah had recently texted to say she was scheduled for a short, 3-week training rotation in a major U.S. city, her first stateside visit in 8 months. She said the schedule would be brutal, nearly 14 hours a day focused on logistics and policy, and she suggested we skip the visit to save her energy and our travel funds for a longer trip in December. I immediately disagreed. 3 weeks in the same country, even if she was busy, felt too close to pass up. The thought of her being just a single plane ride away, rather than a 16-hour flight and 3 security checks, was too tempting. I needed to see her, to hold her, to recharge my commitment for the next long stretch of deployment. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I pulled up my travel app, booked a flight, and found a hotel near the address she'd once casually mentioned as the headquarters for her NGO. I would surprise her. I texted Anna my plan, expecting the usual eye roll. But the panic in Anna's immediate return call surprised even me. "You're just showing up unannounced," Anna demanded. "Jason, that's insane. What if she's busy? What if she's with colleagues? This isn't just a regular job, you know." She said she was skipping it. I explained that it was a surprise, not a hostile invasion. I planned to drop off the care package, tell her I was in town, and treat her to a late dinner after her shift, even if it was only for an hour. Anna's tone changed then, shifting from frustration to an unsettling caution. She mentioned having read articles about romance scams targeting people in LDRs, specifically targeting individuals with partners claiming high-stakes, deployment-heavy careers. She wasn't accusing Sarah, she said, but she kept repeating that long-distance relationships were fragile and that something about this situation had always felt subtly off. I grew defensive. I've seen her in person, Anna. Twice. I've talked to her on video every single day for 3 years. This is Sarah. She is real and she is worth waiting for. I hung up quickly, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with Sarah's safety and everything to do with protecting the structure of my life that I had carefully built around her. I looked down at the plane ticket confirmation on my phone. The next day I would see her, and all of Anna's paranoid theories would dissolve. I would finally show Sarah how committed I truly was. The 8-hour flight felt endless. I kept resisting the urge to text her, needing to keep the surprise intact. Sarah had mentioned the NGO offices were downtown in a tall glass tower, saying she'd be staying in an executive apartment affiliated with the organization. I had a rough address, a strong conviction, and 3 years of unwavering loyalty packed into my suitcase. When the plane finally landed, I hailed a cab, gave the driver the address, and braced myself for the shock of seeing my partner's face after 8 long months. It would be the happiest surprise of our 3-year relationship. My conviction hardened with every mile the plane traveled. I wasn't flying across the country for a lie. I was flying for love. I needed to prove Anna and my own subconscious doubts wrong. I needed Sarah physically present to stabilize the foundations of the relationship I had built my life upon. The cab dropped me in front of the building complex Sarah had listed. It was a massive glass and steel structure, exactly what I expected for a major international non-governmental organization. Clean, imposing, and vaguely cold. I paid the driver and pulled my small suitcase onto the pristine sidewalk, the sun glinting off the polished lobby entrance. Everything about the location screamed professional, high stakes, and legitimate. I walked inside. The lobby was expansive, quiet, with high ceilings and a wall displaying the NGO's mission statement next to a world map dotted with active deployment zones. I approached the reception desk where a woman in a severe black blazer sat behind a thick slab of polished granite. I tried to keep my smile casual, hiding the frantic pulse in my throat. I said, trying to sound like a man who belonged there, "I'm here to surprise Sarah Reynolds. She's here for the 3-week training rotation. I'm her partner, Jason." The receptionist offered a tight, practiced smile. "Do you have an appointment, sir? All visitors must be registered 24 hours in advance for security protocols." "It's a surprise, unfortunately." I chuckled, pulling out my wallet. "I just flew in. She should be listed as a trainee or visiting delegate, though. REYLNOLDS Sarah." The woman's fingers began to click across her keyboard. I watched her face. It remained politely neutral for a few seconds, then shifted slightly, a tiny, involuntary frown that sent a jolt of anxiety through my stomach. She typed again, slower this time. She checked the clock on her monitor and typed once more. Finally, she looked up, the professional warmth completely gone. "Sir, I have searched the delegate registry, the trainee roster for the current 3-week session, and our full staff directory." She paused, and the silence in the enormous lobby suddenly felt deafening. "We have absolutely no one by the name of Sarah Reynolds associated with this building or this organization. No current employees, no visiting delegates, and no one registered in the housing block." My mind went instantly blank. It was like standing on solid ground and having a trapdoor open beneath your feet. I stared at the world map on the wall, unable to process the words. My first, immediate thought was that I had the wrong organization, or maybe even the wrong city. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice coming out thin and brittle. "Maybe she's listed under an operational name. She's a logistics and policy specialist. She's been deployed for years. She said she'd be here for the 3-week policy session." She maintained eye contact, completely unfazed by my rising desperation. "I'm certain, sir. I checked all variations. If she were supposed to be here for 3 weeks, she would have been registered in our system days ago. I apologize, but we cannot grant you access." The professionalism of her refusal was what made it so devastating. It wasn't a mistake, it was a definitive, cold fact. I pulled out my phone, suddenly frantic. I needed to prove her wrong. I scrolled through my photos until I found one I used often. Sarah in what I believed was her uniform. She was standing in front of a neutral background, a serious expression on her face, wearing a crisp, light blue collared shirt with epaulets and subtle organizational patches on the shoulders. It was the photo she'd sent me when she first got promoted. "This is her," I insisted, holding the screen toward the receptionist. "She's in uniform here. She has to be here." The receptionist peered at the photo. After a moment, she signaled to a uniformed security guard who was standing near the entrance, a man with a stern face and an official-looking lanyard. "Officer, could you take a look at this, please?" she asked. The guard walked over and took my phone, studying the image with a critical eye. He held it for perhaps 8 seconds, his gaze sharp and methodical, taking in details I had never noticed. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable, and handed the phone back. "Sir," the guard said, his voice deep and deliberate, "that uniform is a costume. It's an online purchase, likely from a site that caters to movie props or cosplay." The words didn't make sense to me. They simply didn't compute. I stared at the photo of Sarah's proud, serious face, at the uniform I'd seen her wear dozens of times on video calls, the uniform I'd never once questioned. "What do you mean, a costume?" I asked, hearing the desperate confusion in my own voice. He pointed to the screen with his finger, careful not to touch it. "The patches, the rank insignia, and the organizational colors are all subtly wrong. They're similar enough to be convincing at a glance, or maybe over a video call, but they are not the markings of any actual major non-governmental aid organization. That shirt is a generic, low-quality commercial item. Whoever sold this to her didn't get the details right." The air rushed out of my lungs. Not only was the organization wrong, but the very uniform, the symbol of her dedicated, high-stakes life, was a prop. The reality I had so carefully constructed for 3 years, the long nights, the early morning calls, the waiting, the defending of her mission, had been built on a fiction. It wasn't just a scheduling mix-up, it was a lie. I thanked the staff, pulling my suitcase behind me as I stumbled out of the perfect, legitimate glass tower and back into the relentless sunlight. My hands were shaking. I stood on the corner, feeling exposed and utterly lost. Sarah's supposed home address was somewhere 3,000 miles away, but I knew the care packages I sent had to go somewhere for her rare stateside visits. I pulled up my email, found the tracking number from the last package, and pulled out the return address. That address, a residential street miles away from the glass tower, was the only tangible link I had left. I had to go there. I hailed another cab, the realization that I was no longer a devoted partner on a surprise visit, but a man conducting a desperate, private investigation, settling heavily in my gut. The name, the job, the uniform, they were all dust. I had to find the address on the care package boxes. That was the only real thing left. The cab ride felt excruciatingly long, a journey that covered miles, but also the entire distance between my former blissful ignorance and the growing, icy dread. The cab finally pulled up to a quiet residential street, lined with oak trees and houses that looked exactly like the kind of place where people led simple, honest, predictable lives. No glass towers, no security gates, no international aid headquarters. The house that matched the return address was a split level, maybe 60 years old, with a sedan parked haphazardly in the driveway and a bright pink plastic tricycle lying on its side near the porch. It was normal, dangerously, banally normal. I paid the driver, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. This was the point of no return. Up until now, I could have rationalized the whole thing as an administrative mistake, a wrong turn in communication. Now, I was about to confront the real-world consequences of the lie. I walked up the short path. My hand hesitated over the doorbell. What would I say? I am Jason, the partner of the high-level international aid worker who has never actually left the house. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to turn around and fly home and simply pretend none of this ever happened. But 3 years of my life, 3 years of commitment and self-justification demanded an answer. I knocked firmly. The door opened almost immediately. The woman standing there was in her late 30s, wearing faded sweatpants and a tired expression that went beyond just having a bad day. She was bouncing a baby on one hip, and 2 other children, maybe 4 and 6, shrieked past her legs, battling over a bright yellow toy truck. The domestic chaos was overwhelming. "Can I help you?" she asked, shifting the baby and trying to corral the older 2 with her foot. "Yes, I'm looking for Sarah Reynolds," I said, the name sounding foreign and ridiculous in this setting. I paused, trying to figure out how to explain our relationship. I'm Jason. I'm her partner. I was supposed to meet her here while she was in the city for her training rotation. The woman's eyes widened instantly. The exhaustion on her face was replaced by a look of sheer, horrified realization. She looked quickly over her shoulder into the house and then back at me. "Oh my God," she breathed, dropping her voice to a near whisper. "You must be Jason. I'm Melanie, Amy's sister. You better come, Amy, not Sarah." The casual switch of the name hit me harder than the revelation of the fake uniform. Sarah Reynolds was gone. Amy Davis was here and Melanie was her sister. I stepped inside into a home that smelled of microwave popcorn, baby powder, and old dust. The children immediately surrounded me, staring at my suitcase with wide, curious eyes, completely oblivious to the silent drama unfolding above their heads. Melanie gestured toward a door near the kitchen that presumably led to the lower level. She bounced the baby again, her voice tight with strain. "I didn't know what she told you, but please, I think you should sit down." I remained standing. I couldn't sit. I needed to know the worst. She told me she was a logistics officer, an aid worker, constantly deployed overseas for the last 3 years. She said she was here for 3 weeks of training. Melanie closed her eyes for a moment, letting out a heavy, weary sigh. "Jesus Christ, Amy," she murmured, opening her eyes to reveal a deep, heartbreaking pity there. "Look, she's not an aid worker. She's not deployed. She's not even a Sarah. She's Amy. And she has been living in my basement for the last 5 years." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and absolute. 5 years. We had been dating for 3. 3 years of video calls every single night. 3 years of planning a future around her fabricated high-status career. My mind scrambled for a loophole. Maybe she was on leave and Melanie was covering for her. "But the uniform," I stammered. "The video calls, every day." How's Melanie rubbed her temple, a gesture of profound wariness. She bought it online, from a costume website. She spends all her time down there. Video chatting people is pretty much all she does. She got really good at it, apparently. She pointed toward the basement door. "She's down there now. She hasn't shaved in a week. Please, I had no idea she was doing this to anyone. I only knew she was constantly online." I looked at the door. I had traveled 3,000 miles to see my dedicated partner, the selfless international aid worker, and she was waiting for me in a basement, not an office. The humiliation was total, overwhelming the initial shock. My throat tightened with a raw, desperate rage. I walked to the door, opened it, and started down the stairs. I needed to see this stranger who had hijacked my life. I needed to know what a lie of this magnitude actually looked like. The facade had completely crumbled, and now I was walking directly into the disgusting, chaotic truth. I walked toward the basement door, the smell of stale air and unwashed clothes hitting me like a physical blow. I prepared to face the woman who'd stolen 3 years of my life. The stairwell was steep and poorly lit, and the walls were covered with peeling 70s wallpaper. With every step down, the sound of amplified gaming audio grew louder, a cacophony of explosions and triumphant, digitized music. When I reached the concrete floor, I stopped dead. The basement was a horror show of arrested development. In the center of the room, seated on a sagging floral print couch, was a woman who looked vaguely like Sarah, but only in the way a heavily airbrushed magazine photo resembles the actual model after a week of binge eating. She was wearing stained gray sweatpants and a threadbare t-shirt. A massive pair of gaming headphones covered her ears, and her eyes were locked onto an enormous, high-definition television screen displaying a chaotic first-person shooter game. The coffee table was an archaeological dig of trash energy drink cans covered every available surface, forming metallic pyramids around empty cardboard pizza boxes stacked precariously in one corner. The air was thick, heavy with the stench of sweat, stagnant food, and the metallic tang of those chemical energy drinks. Her hair hadn't been washed in days, maybe weeks, and she had clearly gained a noticeable amount of weight since our last video call. She was utterly absorbed, her fingers mashing buttons on a controller with frantic dedication. I stood there for a full 30 seconds, watching this stranger who was supposed to be my partner. This was Amy. This was the brilliant, dedicated Sarah Reynolds who was saving lives and structuring global policy. I watched her twitch duck, and yell a muffled curse into her headset as her character was clearly killed on screen. I had built my life around waiting for her, and she was here, living the absolute definition of wasted time. Finally, I spoke her name using the one I had known. Sarah, nothing. The gaming audio continued. I said it louder, the sound cutting through the digital noise. Sarah. She paused the game then, the screen freezing on a bloody still frame. Slowly, she pulled off the headset, letting it rest around her neck, and turned to look at me. For a split second, I saw it, raw, undiluted panic flashing across her eyes. It lasted maybe half a heartbeat. Then the panic was gone, replaced by a practiced, utterly casual smile. It was the same bright, wide smile I had fallen in love with on 1,000 video calls. Jason, she said, her voice sounding falsely bright, like she was confirming my identity rather than expressing surprise. What are you doing here? I thought you decided to skip this one. I felt a dizzying surge of pure, cold anger. The audacity was breathtaking. I gestured around the fetid room, at the stacks of filth, at her stained clothes, at the monumental television dominating the basement. What the hell is this? I demanded, the words ringing out in the enclosed space. Start talking right now. No more lies. Where is the NGO? Where is the training? Where is the uniform? She stood up. That's when I noticed the physical change more clearly. On video calls, she always sat upright, strategically positioned with flattering lighting. Standing now, she looked heavy and sedentary. She took a step toward me, reaching a hand out as if to touch my arm. Look, Jason, I can clarify everything. She began, running a hand through her greasy hair. It's not what it looks like. I know this is a shock, but I was going to tell you eventually. I promise. I moved back so fast I almost tripped over a pile of dirty clothes. Don't come near me. You tell me what this is right now. She dropped her hand and launched into a rambling, pathetic explanation. She explained that she had lost her sales job 5 years ago. She had moved in with Melanie temporarily. The economy had been terrible, and the anxiety of job hunting had become too intense. She talked about it like a minor inconvenience, not a 5-year lifestyle choice that involved pathological deception. The Navy, the aid work, the deployments. I pressed, cutting her off. The life you've been living. She finally admitted the truth, though with a strange, defensive pride. She had never been employed by any organization. She had bought the fake uniform from a costume website years ago because she thought the persona would make her seem more successful, more interesting, on the dating app where we had first connected. She claimed she'd planned to tell me the truth, but I seemed so impressed by the whole thing that she couldn't bear to disappoint me. We talked every single day for 3 years, I said, trying to contain the sheer disbelief. How did you fake deployment? How did you manage time zones and schedules? Amy actually looked proud. I researched it. I read reports, I understood the time zone shifts. I set up alarms. The backdrop was just a corner of Melanie's laundry room that I carefully arranged to look official. It was a lot of work, Jason. You have to admit I was good at it. Her pride in her own elaborate deceit was utterly sickening. I asked about the 2 times we had met in person, the times I had flown across the country to spend time with my deployed partner. Her eyes darted nervously toward the ceiling. Those were the only 2 times I left the house in years. She whispered. I borrowed Melanie's car, drove to a hotel, and pretended I was on leave. And here came the punch that truly broke me. The money for those trips, she continued, speaking faster now. The hotel, the nice dinners, the rental car. I used money from Melanie's disability checks. The money is meant for her kids, but I was going to pay it back once I got a job. I just stared at her. The woman I had defended, waited for, and loved, the person who had created a life of high-status commitment, was an unemployed basement dweller who stole from her sister's disabled children to maintain her gaming habit and finance her fictional life. Was any of it real? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Anything at all? The person I fell in love with. She insisted, stepping toward me again. Her feelings were real, that she truly cared about me, and that everything we shared was genuine, even if the circumstances weren't. I backed up again, feeling a wave of nausea. Don't touch me. You are delusional if you think any part of this is real. You created a fictional character. I fell in love with a fiction. She got defensive, adopting a wounded tone. "You're being dramatic. Lots of people exaggerate online. I was planning to tell you everything once we got engaged. I could explain it better then." Engaged. The word hung there, a monstrous joke. This woman, in her filth-stained sweatpants, surrounded by empty energy drink cans, thought we were on the road to marriage while living off her sister's charity. The absurdity of the situation finally triggered a different emotion in me, a cold resolve. I needed to know the full cost of this lie. Amy's insistence that she cared about me sounded hollow, especially when I knew she'd stolen from her own family, but it was nothing compared to the next wave of discoveries. I left her in the basement, still muttering about how I was being unfair, and climbed back up the stairs. Melanie was standing in the kitchen, her back to me, trying to soothe the crying baby. The chaos of the children now felt secondary to the immense silence of the betrayal. "How long has she been doing this?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The gaming, the staying home." 5 years, Melanie confirmed, turning around. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She moved in after losing her job at a call center. She promised it was temporary. I let her stay because she was my sister, and she was going through a tough time. She went on to explain that she knew Amy was video chatting with people, but she genuinely assumed they were just online gaming friends or platonic companions. She couldn't fathom the elaborate lie of the deployed aid worker. I felt a pang of pity for Melanie, who looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her children and everything to do with being an unwilling enabler for 5 years. Then I told her the worst part that she didn't know. The 2 times I came here, the in-person visits, she used money from your disability account. She admitted it. Melanie's face went white. She sat down heavily in a kitchen chair, gently settling the baby on her lap.
How much?
I couldn't give her an exact figure, but I walked her through the timeline, the nice hotels, the rental cars, the extravagant dinners we had shared. I estimated it had to be at least a few $1,000s just from my 2 visits alone. Melanie covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes swimming with tears. She admitted she had noticed money missing from her account, but Amy had always convinced her it was miscalculation, that raising 3 young children on a fixed income was confusing. She had wanted to trust her sister. I then realized I needed to check my own history, a task that filled me with a sickening sense of dread. I pulled up my messages with Amy. I had completely blocked out a memory from a year and a half ago, but digging through the old texts brought it surging back. "Last year," I said, remembering the exact wording of the call. She claimed she had to return home suddenly for a family emergency. She said her mother was sick, and her organizational pay schedule meant she couldn't access immediate funds for the travel. She called my father directly. Melanie shook her head sadly. "Our mother has been dead for 10 years, Jason." I sank onto a nearby stool, closing my eyes. My dad, bless his trusting, generous nature, had wired Amy $3,000 that day. She had promised to pay him back within a month, claiming there was a glitch in the organization's foreign banking system. She never did. She had smoothed it over with an expensive gift basket sent to my parents later, apologizing for the delay, and my parents had, of course, told her not to worry about it. That family helps family. I texted Anna, needing to externalize the absurdity and the devastation. My fingers moved quickly across the screen. "What is the craziest thing a man has ever gone through in a long-distance relationship? Because whatever it is, I think I just beat it." Anna responded immediately, demanding more information, but I couldn't articulate the sheer scale of the lie yet. Not only was my partner a fraud, but she was a thief who had stolen $3,000 from my good-hearted father. The shame of having vouched for this monster, of having brought her into my family's life, felt unbearable. Then the phone buzzed, not with a message from Anna, but with a text from an unknown number. It was Melanie. She had found my contact in Amy's old phone. She apologized for reaching out, but she had gone through Amy's computer after I had left. She hadn't been snooping, she claimed. She was desperately trying to find any evidence of where her $8,000 had gone. What she found next shattered my already fractured reality. Melanie sent me a series of screenshots. They were dating app profiles, not just one, but 5 different apps, All of them featured the same fake uniform photos, the same international aid worker backstory, sometimes with slightly different fictional names, but always the same core persona. Amy had been actively messaging women on all of them. The screenshots were damning. Some conversations were months old, others were terrifyingly recent, dated within the last week. A week when I thought she was cutting our visit short because she was so busy preparing for her crucial rotation. I texted Melanie back, my mind racing. How many others? Melanie replied that from what she could tell, there were at least 15 active conversations. The message history spanned years and included hundreds of victims. But one conversation stood out: a woman named Patricia, living on the East Coast, who apparently thought she was also deeply in love, and chillingly, thought she was engaged to the deployed Sarah Reynolds. Patricia quit her job to prepare for moving closer to the supposed headquarters, Melanie wrote. The betrayal shifted from personal damage to mass criminal fraud. Amy wasn't just lonely, she was a predator. I asked Melanie what Amy's endgame was, since she hadn't explicitly asked me for money. Melanie explained that Amy had started the profile as a joke to see if anyone would believe it after she lost her job. When the first person believed her, it made her feel like someone important, someone successful, rather than a failure living in her sister's basement. It was a narcissistic feedback loop. The fake life felt more real than her actual life, and she couldn't stop. But even then, Amy had insisted to Melanie that the relationship with me specifically had been different, that she had actually fallen for me, and that what we had was real. Melanie had told her that was insane. You cannot have real feelings in a foundation of pure fiction. The situation was spiraling beyond simple heartbreak. My parents were financially defrauded. Melanie's family was damaged, and multiple other women were being psychologically manipulated. And Amy, the center of this hurricane of lies, was trying to use her own depression and anxiety as a shield to make me feel sorry for her. The cold resolve I had felt earlier was now mixing with a terrifying sense of fear. If Amy was so dedicated to the fiction that she would steal from children, what would she do now that the fiction was definitively over? The anger was a useful fuel, but the fear was starting to set in. Amy had lost her anchor, and a cornered liar can be dangerous. After the basement confrontation and the subsequent text exchange with Melanie, I had nowhere to go but home. I took the next flight back, leaving my suitcase at my apartment door and collapsing onto the couch. Anna, bless her protective soul, was already there when I landed, having used my spare key. She had read my vague text about beating the craziest long-distance relationship story, and she immediately moved into triage mode. She sat with me while I detailed the horrors of the basement, the stolen money, the 15 other women, and the costume uniform. Anna listened without judgment, her previous skepticism replaced by utter, cold rage. "This isn't just a bad breakup, Jason," she said firmly, making tea in my kitchen. "This is criminal fraud. This is serious." We spent the next day on the phone with my parents, confirming the details of the $3,000 loan, and scheduling a call with Douglas, my dad's lawyer friend. I was focusing on the criminal aspects, trying to use logic and procedure to wall off the emotional devastation. Then Melanie texted again. She had officially asked Amy to leave the house, and the fallout was ugly. Melanie sent me a screenshot of a text chain where Amy was claiming I was the stalker. Amy claimed I had shown up uninvited and invaded her privacy, and that she was considering getting a restraining order against me. The victim-flipping delusion was stunning. I had traveled to the address she provided, looking for the person she claimed to be, and she was trying to turn me into the aggressor. "She's losing control, Jason," Anna warned me, leaning over my shoulder to read the text. "This is exactly what narcissists do when their narrative is threatened. Do not engage. We need to focus on protecting you." The threat became far more tangible when Nathan, Amy's cousin, called me out of the blue. Amy had gone to stay with him temporarily, and he was already fed up with her refusal to contribute. "I'm sorry to call you Jason," Nathan said, his voice hesitant, "but Amy is getting concerning. She's been asking me questions about your work, where you are during the day, what your schedule is like. She doesn't know where you live, but she knows the city you are in." I felt a cold rush of adrenaline. I had mentioned my company name casually over video calls dozens of times, It wouldn't take a sophisticated criminal to find the address of my office building. Do you think she'd actually show up? I asked Nathan, my voice barely a whisper. Should I be worried about my safety? Nathan hesitated before answering. I don't think she would physically hurt you. She's passive. But she's absolutely fixated on convincing you that what you had was real. She thinks if she can just get you alone, she can explain it away. I thanked him and immediately called my building security, putting a note on my file and getting Anna to help me vary my routes to and from work. The terror shifted from abstract emotional damage to real physical paranoia. I was no longer grieving a partner. I was anticipating an attack from a delusional liar. 3 days later, the threat materialized. I was leaving work around 6 in the evening. My office is in one of those huge aging downtown buildings with a multi-level parking garage attached. I had been hyper-aware for days, checking my rearview mirror constantly, walking with my keys already in my hand. I was halfway to my car on the second level, surrounded by the hollow echo of fluorescent lights and empty concrete. I heard someone call my name. Jason. My entire body froze. I recognized the voice instantly, even without the bright, false video call filter. Amy was standing near the pedestrian entrance to the garage, leaning against the cold concrete wall, just like a movie character waiting for a secret meeting. For a split second, I tried to decide whether to turn and run back into the safety of the building or sprint the final distance to my car. She immediately held up her hands in that universal gesture of surrender. I just want to talk, Jason. I'm not going to hurt you or anything crazy like that. She started walking slowly toward me, her eyes desperate. I've been waiting for 2 hours. I just need 5 minutes to explain things properly, face to face, without Melanie or Anna or anyone else interfering. How did you know where I worked? I asked, my voice flat and dangerous. She shrugged, trying to appear reasonable. I went through our old messages. You mentioned the company name once. It wasn't hard to look up the address. You can't fault me for trying to communicate. Showing up at my workplace is harassment, I stated, backing toward my car. I don't want to talk to you. You need to leave right now. She started talking faster, the words tumbling out in a rush of self-pity and defense. She admitted I had every right to be angry, but if I just listened, I would understand that the core of what they had was real. She kept repeating the same desperate mantra. The circumstances were fake, but my feelings weren't. Doesn't that count for something? Were your feelings real when you were messaging 15 other women at the same time? I cut in, my voice shaking with controlled fury. Were they real when you stole money from my parents to pay for our dinner dates? Were they real when you spent 3 years lying about every single thing, down to your daily schedule? She flinched, the casual facade finally cracking. She insisted the other women didn't matter. They were just conversations. I was the only one she had ever met in person, the only one who was real to her. The money was only a borrowed, she claimed, and she had always planned to pay it back once she got on her feet. A rough patch that lasts 5 years is not a rough patch, Amy, I said, stepping closer, emboldened by my anger. It is a lifestyle choice, and you are being cruel by cutting me off when I am clearly struggling with my mental health. That was the last straw. That accusation, that final, disgusting attempt to flip the script and make me responsible for her mental stability after she had traumatized me and financially damaged my family, ignited something cold and decisive inside me. I told her she didn't get to use mental health as an excuse for fraud. I told her about my brother, who had actually died 3 years ago, a piece of real grief I had shared with her early on. She had pretended to understand, using her fake international trauma as a point of empathy. I told her that was not mental illness, that was just being a profoundly terrible person. I told her I was getting in my car and leaving, and if she ever showed up at my work again, I would call the police. I turned my back and reached for the door handle. She grabbed my arm. It wasn't hard, but it was enough to stop me, to physically prevent me from walking away. That's when I heard the heavy, purposeful footsteps. 2 of the building's uniformed security guards appeared around the corner, having clearly seen us arguing on the closed-circuit television feed. Is everything all right here, sir? One of them asked, his hand resting near his side. I looked directly at the guard. No, I stated clearly. This woman is harassing me. I want her removed from the property. Amy immediately let go of my arm and backed away, hands raised, the panic flooding her face again. This is a misunderstanding. We're just having a relationship discussion. She is my partner. The guard didn't even look at Amy. He looked straight at me. Do you know this woman? Do you want her here? No, I said to both questions. They immediately walked toward Amy, escorting her out of the garage. I heard her yelling my name and protesting the misunderstanding until her voice faded down the concrete ramps. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, shaking, the cold realization settling in the lies were over, but the danger was not. This had to end, definitively, with consequences she could not evade. This wasn't a breakup dinner, it was an intervention, a deposition, and a final act of self-respect, all rolled into one. The encounter in the parking garage had galvanized my decision Amy would not be able to minimize, deflect, or lie her way out of this. It required a formal, witness confrontation that had real consequences attached. I called Anna first, then my parents. My dad was ready to file a police report immediately, but my mom suggested this more calculated approach. Amy needed a public, inescapable moment of truth, a psychological hammer blow to her delusion. My dad, after talking to his lawyer friend, Douglas, agreed to the plan. Douglas confirmed he would attend to ensure we had a legal witness, and to advise on the criminal implications of the fraud. We set up the meeting for Saturday afternoon at a quiet corner booth in a local diner, neutral territory, but easily observable. Anna contacted Amy from my phone, saying I was willing to meet to discuss the situation and achieve some resolution. Amy responded instantly, pathetically hopeful. When Saturday came, Amy was already sitting in the booth when we arrived. She looked nervous but had clearly tried to clean up, wearing a relatively fresh shirt, though her eyes were still shadowed with anxiety. Her face completely changed when she saw the size of our party. I walked in first, followed closely by Anna, then my mother and father, and finally Douglas. What is this? Amy demanded, her eyes darting between my parents and the stern-looking man she didn't know. Why did you bring an audience? You set me up. I slid into the booth across from her and looked her straight in the eye. This is closure, Amy, not reconciliation. Everyone positioned themselves strategically. My parents sat down at the adjacent booth, perfectly placed behind Amy. Anna stood nearby, holding her phone. Douglas stood at the end of our booth, a silent, imposing legal presence. Then Anna turned her phone screen toward Amy. Amy's eyes widened, and her already pale face went genuinely white. Staring back at her through the WhatsApp video call were Melanie and her husband Roger. The domestic chaos was gone. Melanie and Roger were composed, their expressions a mix of anger and profound disappointment. Amy, I said, keeping my voice level. This is my family, Anna, and this is Douglas. He's an attorney, and is here to witness this conversation and advise us on the potential criminal charges you are currently facing. Douglas spoke next, his voice clear and professional. He outlined the situation, making sure to use terms like wire fraud, larceny, and impersonation under false pretense. He stated clearly that if my parents or Melanie decided to press charges, there was more than enough evidence for a successful prosecution. I watched the realization of true fear settle over Amy's face. The legal terms terrified her far more than my personal anger ever could. I told her everything I had wanted to say in the parking garage, but with the cold, factual weight of the last week's discoveries behind me. I told her that the Sarah Reynolds I had loved did not exist, that I had built my life around a ghost, and that she was a thief and a fraud. When I finished, Amy tried to minimize it again. She said I was exaggerating, that she'd just been dealing with deep difficulty, and I was making a simple mistake sound like a capital offense. My father stood up. The sheer weight of his disappointment and presence made Amy shut up instantly. Then, Melanie's voice came clearly through Anna's phone speaker. Amy, look at me, she instructed. Do you understand that what you did was not just a mistake, but morally wrong and actively harmful? You have hurt Jason and his family, and you have destroyed ours. Amy looked at the phone screen, clearly struggling to maintain her facade under the stare of her own sister. She hesitated for a long moment before muttering yes. But I was in a dark place. Roger's face appeared next to Melanie's. His voice was harsh and final. Desperation does not excuse stealing $8,000 from a family with 3 small children, money meant for medical expenses and childcare. That is theft, Amy. Pure and simple. I presented our terms. Full repayment of the money owed $3,000 to my parents and $8,000 to Melanie and Roger. No further contact with me whatsoever. And, most critically, a full acknowledgement that the relationship was based on lies and was definitively over. Amy agreed to the repayment and the no-contact terms, though she pleaded that it would take time since she had no income. But when it came to acknowledging that the relationship was dead, she stumbled. I still believe what we had was real, Jason. If you just give me time, you'll change your mind. I knew I needed to obliterate the final shred of her delusion. Tell me, Amy, I challenged her. You claim our connection was real. Tell me my middle name. Tell me the name of my deceased brother. Tell me what I studied in college. She couldn't answer any of them accurately. She looked flustered, grasping at conversational straws. She didn't know the core facts of my life, because she had never actually paid attention to me as a person. She had only been focused on how I made her, Sarah Reynolds, the successful aid worker, feel about herself. That's not love, Amy. I told her, my voice quiet but utterly firm. That's narcissism. You were in love with the successful reflection of yourself that existed when someone believed your lie. You never loved me. She called me cruel, saying I was purposely trying to hurt her when she was at her lowest point. My mom leaned forward from the booth behind her. You have no idea what cruelty looks like, Amy. Jason has been remarkably restrained. Melanie spoke again through the phone. She told Amy she had 1 month to figure out a repayment plan, and if she couldn't manage that, they would file formal charges. Roger added that Nathan had told them to tell Amy she needed to find somewhere else to stay by the end of the week. Douglas gave Amy his business card, stating all communication regarding repayment must go through him. If the $11,000 wasn't paid or a reasonable plan wasn't established within 3 months, they would move forward with legal action. I stood up. Amy reached across the table, her hand hovering in the air, desperate to touch me one last time. But she stopped herself when Douglas shifted, his presence a clear boundary. She spoke my name one last time, a pathetic plea. Goodbye, Amy, I said. Not see you later, not we'll figure this out. Just goodbye. I walked out of the diner, Anna and my parents following, leaving Amy alone with the crushing reality of the video screen and the legal papers. The climax was over. The lie had been judged. The goodbye I gave her wasn't dramatic, it was just final. I walked away from the diner and into a world that was suddenly terrifyingly real. It has been 6 weeks since the confrontation. Amy hasn't tried to contact me, not even once. Douglas confirmed that Amy reached out to him almost immediately, clearly terrified by the legal threat. She managed to get hired at a fast food restaurant near where she was staying and is now attempting to establish a minimum payment schedule for the $11,000 she owes my parents and Melanie. Melanie also texted me a few updates. She said Amy had moved out of Nathan's place and into some extended stay motel a few cities away, paying weekly with money Nathan had loaned her. A loan that came with the strict condition that she start working. The passive acceptance of her life was finally over, replaced by the necessity of earning a paycheck to avoid being arrested. My parents are cautiously optimistic they will see their $3,000 back eventually, even if it takes years. For them, the closure came from the admission and the apology Amy was forced to give. They realized they weren't foolish, they were simply kind, and Amy was predatory. For me, the immediate rage and investigative focus have faded, replaced by a strange, quiet grief. The fact is, I mourned Sarah Reynolds, the committed aid worker, not the actual Amy Davis. I was grieving the loss of 3 years spent dedicated to a fantasy. It felt like burying a fictional character who had somehow possessed my real life. I spent a lot of time analyzing my own choices. Why did I fall so hard for someone who was always geographically unattainable? I started to understand what Anna had tried to tell me all along. I was afraid of genuine intimacy. Sarah's constant deployment was not a burden to me. It was a perfect excuse. The distance kept my emotional walls firmly intact. I could love her intensely without ever having to deal with the messy, unpredictable reality of a physical, daily relationship. I had protected myself from real vulnerability by choosing a partner who couldn't stay. I realized I hadn't been committed to Sarah. I had been committed to the idea of myself as the strong, patient partner supporting a world saver. I had loved the distance more than the person. That realization was humbling and painful, but also clarifying. It forced me to acknowledge that the internal conflict, my fear of proximate, messy intimacy stemming from past emotional hurts, was the real foundation of the 3-year lie. Amy merely provided the perfect scaffolding for my own avoidance. Anna has been incredible. We have dinner 3 times a week now, and the conversations are real, immediate, and tangible. We talk about her life, my life, and the mundane logistics of the present, not the fantastical logistics of a supposed deployment. I still find myself looking at my phone late at night, expecting the familiar message from a distant time zone, but the screen remains silent. It is a silence that I am slowly learning to embrace as peace. I may be out 3 years of time and emotional energy, but I gained the clarity to recognize the difference between self-protection and genuine connection. The story of Sarah Reynolds, the fake aid worker, is officially over, and I am finally ready to start a life that is defined by presence, not absence.